The Dyatlov Pass incident, Russian, was an event where 9 people died in the northern Ural Mountains between 1 and February 2, 1959, in uncertain circumstances. The experienced trekking group, who were all from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, had established a camp on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, in an area now named in honor of the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. During the night, something caused them to tear their way out of their tents and flee the campsite, all while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet Union authorities determined that 6 had died from hypothermia while the other 3 showed signs of physical trauma. One victim had a fractured skull, 2 others had major chest fractures. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these. In 1959, a group was formed for a skiing expedition across the northern Urals in Sverdlovsk Oblast, Soviet Union. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, now Ural Federal University, was the leader who assembled a group of 9 others for the trip, most of whom were fellow students and peers at the university. Each member of the group, which consisted of 8 men and 2 women, was an experienced Grade 2 hiker with ski tour experience, and would be receiving Grade 3 certification upon their return. At the time, this was the highest certification available in the Soviet Union, and required candidates to traverse 300 kilometers, 190 miles. The goal of the expedition was to reach Otorten, a mountain 10 kilometers, 6.2 miles, north of the site of the incident. This route, in February, was estimated as Category 3, the most difficult. The group arrived by train at Ivdel, a town at the center of the northern province of Sverdlovsk Oblast in the early morning hours of January 25, 1959. They then took a truck to Vizhai, a lorry village that is the last inhabited settlement to the north. While spending the night in Vizhai, the skiers purchased 8 loaves of bread to keep their energy levels up for the following day's hike. On January 27, they began their trek toward Otorten from Vizhai. On January 28, one of the members, Yuri Yudin, who suffered from several health ailments, including rheumatism and a congenital heart defect, turned back due to knee and joint pain that made him unable to continue the hike. The remaining group of 9 people continued the trek. Diaries and cameras found around their last campsite made it possible to track the group's route up to the day preceding the incident. On January 31, the group arrived at the edge of a highland area and began to prepare for climbing. In a wooded valley, they cached surplus food and equipment that would be used for the trip back. The following day, February 1, the hikers started to move through the pass. It seems they planned to get over the pass and make camp for the next night on the opposite side, but because of worsening weather conditions, snowstorms and decreasing visibility, they lost their direction and deviated west, up towards the top of Kholat Syakhl. When they realized their mistake, the group decided to stop and set up camp there on the slope of the mountain, rather than move 1.5 kilometers, 0.93 miles, downhill to a forested area which would have offered some shelter from the bad weather. Yudin postulated that Dyatlov probably did not want to lose the altitude they had gained, or he decided to practice camping on the mountain slope. Before leaving, Dyatlov had agreed he would send a telegram to their sports club as soon as the group returned to Vizhai. It was expected that this would happen no later than February 12, but Dyatlov had told Yudin, before his departure from the group, that he expected to be longer. When the 12th passed and no messages had been received, there was no immediate reaction, as delays of a few days were common with such expeditions. On February 20, the relatives of the travelers demanded a rescue operation, and the head of the institute sent the first rescue groups, consisting of volunteer students and teachers. Later, the army and militia forces became involved, with planes and helicopters being ordered to join the rescue operation. On February 26, the searchers found the group's abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Syakhl. The campsite baffled the search party. Mikhail Sharabin, the student who found the tent, said the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. Investigators said the tent had been cut open from inside. 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by people who were wearing only socks or a single shoe or were even barefoot, could be followed, leading down towards the edge of a nearby woods, on the opposite side of the pass, 1.5 kilometers, (0.93 miles) to the northeast. However, after 500 meters, 1,600 feet, these tracks were covered with snow. At the forest's edge, under a large Siberian pine, the searchers found the visible remains of a small fire. There were the first two bodies, those of Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting that one of the skiers had climbed up to look for something, perhaps the camp. Between the pine and the camp, the searchers found 3 more corpses, Dyatlov, Kalmygorova, and Slobodin, who seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. They were found separately at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters, 980, 1,570, and 2,070 feet, from the tree. Finding the remaining 4 travelers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 4 under 4 meters, 13 feet, of snow in a ravine 75 meters, 246 feet, further into the woods from the pine tree. 3 of those 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that those who had died first had their clothes relinquished to the others. Dubinina was wearing Krivonishenko's burned, torn trousers, and her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. A legal inquest started immediately after the first 5 bodies were found. A medical examination found no injuries that might have led to their deaths, and it was eventually concluded that they had all died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. An examination of the 4 bodies which were found in May shifted the narrative as to what had occurred during the incident. 3 of the ski hikers had fatal injuries, Fibobrignoles had major skull damage, and both Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high, comparable to the force of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures, as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure. All 4 bodies found at the bottom of the creek in a running stream of water had soft tissue damage to their head and face. For example, Ludmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of the lips, as well as facial tissue and a fragment of skull bone, while Semyon Zolotaryov had his eyeballs missing. Alexander Koleva taught his eyebrows. V.A. Vozrozdeny, the forensic expert performing the autopsy, judged that these injuries happened post-mortem due to the location of the bodies in a stream. There was initial speculation that the indigenous Mansi people had attacked and murdered the group for encroaching upon their lands, but investigation indicated that the nature of their deaths did not support this hypothesis. Only the hikers' footprints were visible, and they showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle. Although the temperature was very low, around 25 to 30 degrees C, 13 to 22 degrees F, with a storm blowing, the dead were only partially dressed. Some of them had only one shoe, while others had no shoes or wore only socks. Some were found wrapped in snips of ripped clothes that seemed to have been cut from those who were already dead. Journalists reporting on the available parts of the inquest files claim that it states 6 of the group members died of hypothermia and 3 of fatal injuries. There were no indications of other people nearby on Kholat Syakhl apart from the 9 travelers. The tent had been ripped open from within. The victims had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Traces from the camp showed that all group members left the campsite of their own accord, on foot. High levels of radiation were found on only one victim's clothing. To dispel the theory of an attack by the indigenous Mansi people, Vozrozdeny stated that the fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by another human being, because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged. Released documents contained no information about the condition of the skiers' internal organs. There were no survivors of the incident. At the time, the verdict was that the group members had all died because of a compelling natural force. The inquest officially ceased in May 1959 as a result of the absence of a guilty party. The files were sent to a secret archive. On April 12, 2018, the remains of Zolotarev were exhumed upon the initiative of journalists of the Russian tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda. Contradictory results were obtained. One of the experts stated that the character of the injuries resembled a person knocked down by a car, and the DNA analysis did not reveal any similarity to the DNA of living relatives. In addition, it turned out that the name Semyon Zolotarev is not on the list of buried at the Ivanovskoye Cemetery. Nevertheless, the reconstruction of the face from the exhumed skull agrees with the post-war photographs of Semyon, although journalists expressed suspicions that another person was hiding under the name of Semyon Zolotarev after the war. The region was closed to expeditions and hikers for 3 years after the incident, but is currently accessible. In 1997, it was revealed that the negatives from Yuri Krivonishenko's camera were kept in the private archive of one of the investigators, Lev Ivanov. The film material was donated by his daughter to the Memorial Foundation. The diaries of the members became public domain in 2009 in Russia. In February 2019, CNN announced that the Russian authorities were reopening the investigation, although only 3 possible explanations were being considered: an avalanche, a snow slab avalanche, or a hurricane. The possibility of a crime has been completely discounted. 12-year-old Yuri Kuntsevich, who later became the head of the Ekaterinburg-based Dyatlov Foundation, see below, attended 5 of the hikers' funerals. He recalled that their skin had a deep brown tan. Another group of hikers, about 50 kilometers, 31 miles, south of the incident, reported that they saw strange orange spheres in the sky to the north on the night of the incident. Similar spheres were observed in Gibel and adjacent areas continually during the period from February to March 1959, by various independent witnesses, including the Meteorology Service and the military. However, these sightings were not noted in the initial investigation in 1959, and these various independent witnesses only came forward years later. In 1967, Sverdlovsk writer and journalist Yuri Yarovnoy, Russian, published the novel Of the Highest Degree of Complexity, inspired by the incident. Yarovnoy had been involved in the search for Dyatlov's group and at the inquest as an official photographer during both the search and the initial stage of the investigation, and had insight into the events. The book was written during the Soviet era when details of the accident were kept secret and Yarovnoy avoided revealing anything beyond the official position and well-known facts. The book romanticized the accident and had a much more optimistic end than the real events. Only the group leader was found deceased. Yarovnoy's colleagues say that he had alternative versions of the novel, but both were declined because of censorship. Since Yarovnoy's death in 1980, all his archives, including photos, diaries, and manuscripts, have been lost. Anatoly Gushchin, Russian, summarized his research in the book The Price of State Secrets as 9 Lives, Sverdlovsk, 1990. Some researchers criticized the work for its concentration on the speculative theory of a Soviet secret weapon experiment, but its publication led to public discussion, stimulated by interest in the paranormal. Indeed, many of those who had remained silent for 30 years reported new facts about the accident. One of them was the former police officer, Lev Ivanov, who led the official inquest in 1959. In 1990, he published an article which included his admission that the investigation team had no rational explanation for the incident. He also stated that, after his team reported that they had seen flying spheres, he then received direct orders from high-ranking regional officials to dismiss this claim. In 2000, a regional television company produced the documentary film The Mystery of Dyatlov Pass. With the help of the film crew, the Ekaterinburg writer, Anna Matveeva, Russian, published a fiction/documentary novella of the same name. A large part of the book includes broad quotations from the official case, diaries of victims, interviews with searchers and other documentaries collected by the filmmakers. The narrative line of the book details the everyday life and thoughts of a modern woman, an alter ego of the author herself, who attempts to resolve the case. Despite its fictional narrative, Matveeva's book remains the largest source of documentary materials ever made available to the public regarding the incident. In addition, the pages of the case files and other documentaries, in photocopies and transcripts, are gradually being published on a web forum for enthusiastic researchers. A Dyatlov Foundation was founded in 1999 at Ekaterinburg, with the help of Ural State Technical University, led by Yuri Kuntsevich. The foundation's stated aim is to continue investigation of the case and to maintain the Dyatlov Museum to preserve the memory of the dead hikers. On July 1, 2016, a memorial plaque was inaugurated in Solikamsk in Ural's Perm region, dedicated to Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor of the expedition group, who died in 2013. The theory that an avalanche caused the hikers' deaths, while initially popular, has since been questioned. Reviewing the sensationalist Yeti hypothesis, see below, American skeptic author Benjamin Redford suggests is more plausible. That the group woke up in a panic and cut their way out the tent either because an avalanche had covered the entrance to their tent or because they were scared that an avalanche was imminent. Better to have a potentially reparable slit in a tent than risk being buried alive in it under tons of snow. They were purely clothed because they had been sleeping and ran to the safety of the nearby woods where trees would help slow oncoming snow. In the darkness of night they got separated into 2 or 3 groups. One group made a fire, hence the burned hands, while the others tried to return to the tent to recover their clothing, since the danger had apparently passed. But it was too cold, and they all froze to death before they could locate their tent in the darkness. At some point some of the clothes may have been recovered or swapped from the dead, but at any rate the group of 4 whose bodies were most severely damaged were caught in an avalanche and buried under 4 meters, 13 feet, of snow, more than enough to account for the compelling natural force the medical examiner described. Dubonina's tongue was likely removed by scavengers and ordinary predation. Evidence contradicting the avalanche theory includes the location of the incident did not have any obvious signs of an avalanche having taken place. An avalanche would have left certain patterns in debris distributed over a wide area. The bodies found within a month of the event were covered with a very shallow layer of snow, and, had there been an avalanche of sufficient strength to sweep away the second party, these bodies would have been swept away as well. This would have caused more serious and different injuries in the process and would have damaged the tree line. Over 100 expeditions to the region were held since the incident, and none of them ever reported conditions that might create an avalanche. A study of the area using up-to-date terrain-related physics revealed that the location was entirely unlikely for such an avalanche to have occurred. The dangerous conditions found in another nearby area, which had significantly steeper slopes and cornices, were observed in April and May when the snowfalls of winter were melting. During February, when the incident occurred, there were no such conditions. An analysis of the terrain, the slope, and the incline indicates that even if there could have been a very specific avalanche that circumvents the other criticisms, its trajectory would have bypassed the tent. It had collapsed laterally but not horizontally. Dyatlov was an experienced skier, and the much older Semyon Zolotaryov was studying for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Neither of these 2 men would have been likely to camp anywhere in the path of a potential avalanche. Footprint patterns leading away from the tent were inconsistent with someone, let alone a group of 9 people, running in panic from either real or imagined danger. In fact, all the footprints leading away from the tent and towards the woods were consistent with individuals who were walking at a normal pace. A review of the 1959 investigation's evidence, completed in 2015 to 2019 by experienced investigators from the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation, ICRF, on request of the families, confirmed the avalanche with a number of important details added. First of all, the ICRF investigators, one of them an experienced alpinist, confirmed that the weather on the night of the tragedy was very harsh, with wind speeds up to hurricane force, 20 to 30 meters per second, 45 to 67 miles per hour, a snowstorm and temperatures reaching 40 degrees C. These factors weren't considered by the 1959 investigators who arrived at the scene of the accident a week later, when weather had much improved and any remains of the snowslide settled down and had been covered with fresh snowfall. The harsh weather at the same time played critical role in the events of the tragic night, which has been reconstructed as follows. On February 1st, the group arrives at the Kholat Syakhl mountain and erects a large, 9-person tent on an open slope, without any natural barriers, such as forests. On the day and a few preceding days, a heavy snowfall continued, with strong wind and frost. The group, traversing through the slope and digging in the tent into the snow, weakens the snow base. During the night, the snow field above the tent starts to slide down slowly under the weight of the new snow, gradually pushing on the tent fabric, starting from the entrance. The group wakes up and starts evacuation in panic, with only some able to put on warm clothes. Since the entrance was blocked, the group escapes through a hole cut in the tent fabric and descends the slope to find a place perceived as safe from the avalanche, only 1,500 m down, at the forest border. Due to some of the members having very incomplete clothes, the group splits. 2 of the group, only in their underwear and pajamas, were found at the Siberian pine tree, near a fire pit. Their bodies were found first and confirmed to die from hypothermia. 3 hikers, including Dyatlov, attempted to climb back to the tent, possibly to get sleeping bags. They had better clothes than those at the fireplace, but still quite light, and their footwear was incomplete. Their bodies were found at various places ranging 300 to 600 m from the campfire, in poses suggesting they fell down of exhaustion while trying to climb in deep snow in extremely cold weather. Remaining 4, equipped with warm clothes and footwear, were apparently trying to find or build a better camping place in the forest further down the slope. Their bodies were found only 70 m from the fireplace, under several meters thick layer of snow and with traumas indicating they fell into a snow hole formed above a stream. These bodies were only found after 2 months out, according to the ICRF investigators, The factors contributing to the tragedy were extremely bad weather and lack of experience of the group leader in such conditions, which led to selection of a dangerous camping place. After the snowslide, another mistake of the group was to split up, rather than building a temporary camping place down in the forest and trying to survive through the night. Negligence of the 1959 investigators contributed to their report, creating more questions than answers and inspiring numerous conspiracy theories. In 2019, a Swedish-Russian expedition was made to the site, and after investigations they proposed that a violent katabatic wind is a likely explanation for the incident. Katabatic winds are somewhat rare events and can be extremely violent, and was implicated in a similar case in Sweden, the accident at Anaris, where 8 hikers perished in 1978 in the aftermath of a katabatic wind. The topography of these locations were noted to be very similar according to the expedition. A sudden katabatic wind would have made it impossible to remain in the tent, and the most rational course of action would be for the hikers to cover the tent with snow and seek shelter among the trailing. There was also a torch left turned on top of the tent, possibly left there intentionally so the hikers could find their way back to the tent once the winds subsided. The expedition proposed that the group of hikers constructed 2 bivouac shelters, one of which collapsed, leaving 4 of the hikers buried with the violent injuries observed. Another hypothesis popularized by Donnie Icar's 2013 book Dead Mountain is that wind going around Kholat Syakhl mountain created a Kármán vortex street, which can produce infrasound capable of inducing panic attacks in humans. According to Icar's theory, the infrasound generated by the wind as it passed over the top of the Kholat Syakhl mountain was responsible for causing physical discomfort and mental distress in the hikers. Icar claims that, because of their panic, the hikers were driven to leave the tent by whatever means necessary, and fled down the slope. By the time they were further down the hill, they would have been out of the infrasound's path and would have regained their composure, but in the darkness would be unable to return to their shelter. The traumatic injuries suffered by 3 of the victims were the result of their stumbling over the ledge of a ravine in the darkness and landing on the rocks at the bottom. Speculation exists that the campsite fell within the path of a Soviet parachute mine exercise. This theory alleges that the hikers, woken by loud explosions, fled the tent in a shoeless, shell-shocked panic and found themselves unable to return for supply retrieval. After some members froze to death attempting to endure the bombardment, others commandeered their clothing only to be fatally injured by subsequent parachute mine concussions. There are indeed records of parachute mines being tested by the Soviet military in the area around the time the hikers were there. Parachute mines detonate while still in the air rather than upon striking the Earth's surface and produce signature injuries similar to those experienced by the hikers, heavy internal damage with comparably less external trauma. The theory coincides with reported sightings of glowing, orange orbs floating or falling in the sky within the general vicinity of the hikers and allegedly photographed by them, potentially military aircraft or descending parachute mines. This theory, among others, uses scavenging animals to explain Dubinina's injuries. Some speculate the bodies were unnaturally manipulated due to characteristic livor mortis markings discovered during autopsy, as well as burns to hair and skin. Photographs of the tent allegedly show that it was apparently erected incorrectly, something the experienced hikers were unlikely to have done. A similar theory alleges the testing of radiological weapons, and is partly based on the discovery of radioactivity on some of the clothing as well as the bodies being described by relatives as having orange skin and gray hair. However, radioactive dispersal would have affected all of the hikers and equipment instead of just some of it, and the skin and hair discoloration can be explained by a natural process of mummification after 3 months of exposure to the cold and winds. Furthermore, the initial suppression of files regarding the group's disappearance by Soviet authorities is sometimes mentioned as evidence of a cover-up, but the concealment of information regarding domestic incidents was standard procedure in the USSR and therefore far from peculiar. And by the late 1980s, all Dyatlov files had been released in some manner. International Science Times posited that the hikers' deaths were caused by hypothermia, which can induce a behavior known as paradoxical undressing, in which hypothermic subjects remove their clothes in response to perceived feelings of burning warmth. It is undisputed that 6 of the 9 hikers died of hypothermia. However, others in the group appear to have acquired additional clothing from those who had already died, which suggests that they were of a sound enough mind to try to add layers. The 2014 Discovery Channel special Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives explored the theory that the Dyatlov group was killed by a mink or Russian Yeti. The show begins with the premise that the skiers' injuries were such that only a creature with superhuman strength could have caused them. The episode concluded with there being no evidence for its claims. However, in the interview with the two members of a search party who were the first to arrive at the scene, they claimed that they saw footprints larger than those of a human and that those footprints were not included in an official Soviet government report, and additionally that after months of trying to gain access, a Russian documentary narrator Maria finally got access to a classified Soviet military document regarding the investigation of the missing hikers, in which the start date of the investigation is February 6. But the hikers were reported missing almost 10 days later on 15 to 16 February, which could indicate a Soviet military cover-up operation. The documentary also claims that the howling sound they've recorded during their cave and forest expedition does not belong to any known animal species. Keith McCloskey, who has researched the incident for many years and has appeared in several TV documentaries on the subject, traveled to the Dyatlov Pass in 2015 with Yuri Kuntsevich of the Dyatlov Foundation and a group. At the Dyatlov Pass, he noted, there were wide discrepancies in distances quoted between the two possible locations of the snow shelter where Dubinina, Kolevatov, Zolotarev, and Thibault Brignoles were found. One location was approximately 80 to 100 meters from the pine tree where the bodies of Doroshenko and Krivonoskenko were found, and the other suggested location was so close to the tree that anyone in the snow shelter could have spoken to those at the tree without raising their voices to be heard. This second location also has a rock in the stream where Dubinina's body was found and is the more likely location of the two. However, the second suggested location of the two has a topography that is closer to the photos taken at the time of the search in 1959. The location of the tent near the ridge was found to be too close to the spur of the ridge for any significant buildup of snow to cause an avalanche. Furthermore, the prevailing wind blowing over the ridge had the effect of blowing snow away from the edge of the ridge on the side where the tent was. This further reduced any buildup of snow to cause an avalanche. This aspect of the lack of snow on the top and near the top of the ridge was pointed out by Sergei Sogrin in 2010. McCloskey also noted, Lev Ivanov's boss, Yevgeny Okishev, deputy head of the investigative department of the Sverdlovsk Oblast prosecution office, was still alive in 2015 and had given an interview to former Kemerova prosecutor Leonid Proshkin, in which Okishev stated that he was arranging another trip to the past to fully investigate the strange deaths of the last four bodies when Deputy Prosecutor General Yurikov arrived from Moscow and ordered the case shut down. Yevgeny Okishev also stated in his interview with Leonid Proshkin that Klinov, head of the Sverdlovsk prosecutor's office, was present at the first post-mortems in the morgue and spent 3 days there, something Okishev regarded as highly unusual and the only time, in his experience, it had happened. Donny Ikar, who investigated and made a documentary about the incident, evaluated several other theories that are deemed unlikely or have been discredited. They were attacked by Mansi or other local tribesmen. The local tribesmen were known to be peaceful and there was no track evidence of anyone approaching the tent. They were attacked and chased by wildlife. There were no animal tracks and the group would not have abandoned the relative security of the tent. High winds blew one member away, and the others attempted to rescue the person. A large experienced group would not have behaved like that, and winds strong enough to blow away people with such force would have also blown away the tent. An argument, possibly related to a romantic encounter that left some of them only partially clothed, led to a violent dispute. About this, Ikar states that it is highly implausible. By all indications, the group was largely harmonious and sexual tension was confined to platonic flirtation and crushes. There were no drugs present and the only alcohol was a small flask of medicinal alcohol, found intact at the scene. The group had even sworn off cigarettes for the expedition. Furthermore, a fight could not have left the massive injuries that one body had suffered. Popular interest in Russia was revived in the 1990s in the wake of Anatoly Gushin's 1990 novel, The Price of State Secrets is 9 Lives. In 2000, a regional television company produced the documentary film, with a follow-up journal-style novella based on a fictionalized account of the incident released in 2005. In 2015, Russian band Kalin released the album Sorny Night, which attempts to reconstruct the events that led up to the incident. The incident came to wider attention in popular media outside of Russia in the 2010s. The Dyatlov Pass incident, aka Devil's Pass, a film directed by Renny Harlan, was released on February 28, 2013 in Russia and August 23, 2013 in the US. It follows 5 American students retracing the steps of the victims, but, being a work of fiction, makes several changes in describing the initial events, example inverting names of victims. The incident figures prominently in the 2012 novel City of Exiles by Alek Neval Ali. Russia's Mystery Files, Episode 2, The Dyatlov Pass Incident, November 28, 2014, National Geographic. The 2015 Polish horror video game Kholat is inspired by the Dead Mountain incident, in which the player goes to Dyatlov Pass in order to trace the steps of the lost expedition, and begins to uncover the true cause of the hikers' deaths. Kholat Pass Incident, a less well-known tragedy occurring in 1973, also involving a group of explorers mysteriously dying in the Russian wilderness during the Soviet era. Ural County 5, known as the American Dyatlov Pass, a 1978 tragedy in which 5 men mysteriously died or disappeared on their way back from a basketball game in Ural County, California. List of unsolved deaths. Anderson, Lawton, 2019. Death of 9, the Dyatlov Pass Mystery. KDP Print. ISBN 978-0-578-44522-9. Ikar, Downey, 2013. Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. San Francisco, Chronicle Books. ISBN 978-1-4521-2956-3. McCloskey, Keith, 2013. Mountain of the Dead, The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The History Press. ISBN 978-0-7524-9148-6. McCloskey, Keith, 2016. Journey to Dyatlov Pass, An Explanation of the Mystery. Create Space Independent Publishing Platform. ISBN 978-1-5395-8302-8.